And then we hit the 1960s, and this is where we start seeing counterculture movement moving away. Mad Men by 1970s, and you start seeing product placement becoming a thing. So once you have these counterculture movements, especially like hip hop was a big one, you see like brands wanting to associate themselves with the musicians. So Run DMC with Adidas, and then later on I think Puma. And again, you know, it's like, how can we jump onto these things and make these tribes? So Harley Davidson was a huge tribe, right? People have this image of what Harley is, and you owning the bike is not just owning a motorbike, but it's about being a part of the brand. Do you want me to carry on? Because I'll keep rambling. Or
Yeah, I mean, so we're up till like the 70s is like 90s, 60s was Mad Men, right? Was the Mad Men era. So what was there any other like prominent brands 1960s, 1970s that kind of really stuck out in terms of branding, like innovation?
I think Levi's jeans is a big one that made some jumps and bounds. You know, so the famous.
And you mentioned in the article, you mentioned Adidas, basically what they did during the early days of hip hop, which I actually find super interesting because Adidas now, like now it's 2021. They are now sponsoring like a ton of hip hop artists today. So it's like a lot of their branding hasn't changed in that amount of time. So it's kind of cool that they're staying true to their roots.
Yeah, no, I mean it's like Nike is Nike or Nike. We've had that debate already. They've I mean they're the number one sportswear brand. So how do you get in on that? And I think lining themselves with like the counterculture movements of hip hop and like trying to sell this idea of youth. And the thing that was especially interesting with Run DMC is if you think of hip hop at that time, again, this is going hip hop history now. Hip hop artists will basically look like Prince or Rick James. They're very flamboyant, you know, with the sort of I think they call it the androgynous look, where it's like, you know, all brightly coloured. Run DMC came and they were like how you would perceive hip hop today, sportswear, the cap and whatever. This came from Run DMC basically were the ones who designed this style, and the big appeal for them is kids on the street of New York. They identified that this is what I look like. Whereas hip hop of before was like, that's what the music my parents look like. That's like the rock stars of their era. But this was like, you know, and so Adidas jumping on this bandwagon was like almost at the perfect time. So they was able to ship. I think they did a brand deal with them. So Run DMC had a song called My Adidas, I believe, if I'm not correct. If I'm not incorrect, but yeah. So I mean, you see that happening in the 70s, Mad Men. By 1980s, you start seeing a bit of a turnaround and a pushback towards brands. Because by this point, you had brands were quite friendly. Like McDonald's, I remember as a kid, was like, that was a treat. You go to McDonald's because it's amazing. But by 1980s, you start seeing this pushback of people start becoming untrustworthy of brands because it's unhealthy. So it's like... the brand image, you start losing trust. This may actually be an influence, like I think Watergate, like where that was the first time in modern times where there was a distrust of like what you're being told. It's like, no, this was actually a lie. And so I think that, well, they say Generation X were the ones that had the most distrust or cynicism towards things, what they're being told, because of this, like these like things that were happening in like the political sphere. And I think you see that being influence of like, okay, brands always sit next to governments, therefore brands can't be trusted as well. This is another form of propaganda, blah, blah. So you see this pushback. So then Adbusters were the famous website, I don't know if they still exist, where they were fighting against. So they do mock-ups of like famous brand ads, Nike, where they'll do like basically pictures of third world countries, like with their sweatshops and whatnot, and saying like what it does to like the communities and whatever. Like Calvin Klein's posters where like the models are being treated badly, but it's like showing, it's like basically like protest branding almost.
It sounds like very Banksy-esque, right? Where it's always like a political statement or a cultural statement.
Yeah, this was like maybe, I mean, possibly he was inspired by this stuff. I mean, this was way before he made it onto the scene. But again, you see this happening in design. The grunge movement is happening. Hip hop again is becoming quite counterculture to like brands as well at this time. Fighting back Public Enemy, you see it happening. So there's anti-brand, anti-corporate, a message that you see again 80s and early 90s. And so people become less trusting. You see, what was the film? Oh God, American film. I've forgotten what it's called. where basically they had that's it, Repo Man. That's it. They had no branding and no brand placement, product placement in the film. Everything was just like cereal, white boxes, whatever. And again, that was a protest against advertising.